I was a police officer for decades in Mexico, and that experience surpasses all the horrifying things I witnessed during my career. I decided to share this because over 20 years have passed since it happened, but even now, recounting it chills my blood. At that time, I worked with my patrol partner, whom we'll call Lydia. We were good friends in addition to being work colleagues. This experience is unlike any other. Here begins my story. It was an October night. I remember it very well because it was very cold, and there was lightning indicating a big storm coming. The thunder was intense. I remember we had just bought hamburgers to eat in the patrol car, as the night seemed calm. But suddenly, everything changed. Around 11 p.m., we received an urgent alert. We were called to a residence in the city. We didn't get much context about the situation. We were only told that a woman had called emergency services, but she was crying so much that the operator could barely understand her. She only urgently requested a police patrol and an ambulance, claiming her nephew was badly injured. We arrived at the house very quickly because we were nearby. In fact, we were the first ones to arrive, and we witnessed everything. By this time, the rain was pouring heavily, and the thunder was at its peak, adding more drama and horror to an already terrifying situation. I remember Lydia knocked on the door, identifying us as police. A woman, about 35 years old, opened the door, crying and screaming for help. She had red stains on her hands and clothes. When we entered the house, we saw a boy, no older than 6, lying unconscious in the living room. I don't want to be explicit out of respect for the boy and you, but the scene was indescribably awful. At that moment, we heard ambulance sirens. The paramedics came in immediately to assist the boy while we questioned the woman about what had happened and who had done such a terrible thing. The woman, between sobs, said she was the children's aunt. We asked if there was another child in the house, and she said yes, her 11-year-old niece. The mother left the children alone because she worked at night, and the aunt was supposed to stay with them. But when she entered the house, she saw something she still couldn't process. Her niece was attacking her brother with a kitchen knife. She said the girl had a different face. It seemed like someone else. The woman described her niece as having a demonic look, smiling in an unusual, evil way that even she didn't recognize. The aunt said that upon seeing this horrifying scene, she started screaming, asking her niece what she was doing but didn't dare approach because she was in shock. Her niece continued smiling in the way the woman described as diabolical, while the aunt kept shouting at her, asking what she had done. Suddenly, the girl looked at her brother on the floor, and her expression changed to one of fear. She immediately ran upstairs and locked herself in her room. The aunt said she didn't dare enter because she was terrified of what her niece had done. Meanwhile, the paramedics informed us that the boy showed no vital signs. He had passed away. The woman began crying uncontrollably, a heartbreaking sight. Now, it was up to us to go upstairs and confront the girl, question her, and confirm what the aunt had told us. So, Lydia and I went upstairs to the only room with a closed door. Lydia knocked and spoke to the girl, trying to get her to come out. We thought Lydia should do it because, as a woman, she might seem less intimidating to the girl and gain her trust. Lydia told her they only wanted to talk and that nothing would happen to her, but the girl neither opened the door nor responded. We tried to pick the lock because we didn't want to scare her by breaking down the door. But as we worked on the lock, a voice, not a child's voice, started laughing. It was a deep, masculine voice coming from inside the room. This alarmed us because we thought someone else might be in the room with the girl and might be holding her hostage. At that point, we decided to break the door down. But when we entered, the first thing we saw was the girl sitting under her hanging clothes in the closet, staring at us with a smile I can't even begin to describe. A child her age shouldn't be able to smile like that, with so much evil in her eyes and expression. It was exactly as her aunt had described. Lydia asked the girl if she was okay and whether someone else was in the room with her, but she didn't respond. She just kept looking at us with that sinister smile. Meanwhile, I began inspecting the small room, but there was no one else there. There wasn't even a TV or anything that could have produced the deep, macabre laugh my partner and I had heard. Back then, there were no modern cell phones, nor did we find any radio in the room. The only window was barred, so no one could have escaped through it. It was just the girl and no one else. I was utterly bewildered, and I'm sure Lydia was too. That's when we realized it must have been the girl herself who had made that deep, macabre laugh. Lydia cautiously approached her, but suddenly the girl ran toward her. That's when I had to help Lydia restrain her because the girl was screaming, kicking, and trying to escape. We struggled to control her, which was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a police officer. The girl had red stains all over her clothes, hands, and feet, clearly implicating her in what had happened to her brother. We also found the kitchen knife under her closet. The girl was taken for questioning, as were her aunt and mother, who was later informed of what had happened. The investigation confirmed that the girl was responsible for the crime. She even confessed, saying something that left everyone stunned. "He made me do it." Psychological tests were conducted on the girl, and all came back normal. She had no mental illness or psychological disorders. We couldn't explain why she did what she did. When asked, she only kept repeating that he made her do it. During questioning, the girl's aunt and mother revealed that the mother had recently met a man who became her partner. He had convinced her to perform satanic rituals in their home, manipulating her by promising they'd become wealthy and move abroad together. Since the man entered their lives, the girl's behavior changed. She became aggressive, used foul language, and had sudden mood swings. The aunt often caught the girl talking to someone in her room, but no one else was there. Strange things began happening in the house at night, such as glass plates falling from the cupboards or unexplainable noises. The mother admitted to performing rituals with her partner late at night after work. In the house, they found ritual books and voodoo dolls. In the end, the girl was placed in a juvenile detention center, while the mother was released. I don't know what happened after that. However, I firmly believe it was something paranormal. Lydia and I will never forget the sight of that girl with her furious yet cynical eyes and that sinister smile. Perhaps the girl was possessed by a demon, which made her do what she did. Her psychological tests came back normal, and she confessed that he forced her to do it. What really happened that night, I leave to your judgment. My father's name is Diego, and at that time he was patrolling the city streets with his partner, Andres. One early morning, they received a radio order to go to a house nearby. Some neighbors had called emergency services because they heard sinister screams coming from a house they said was abandoned. They thought something terrible was happening to someone inside, but they didn't dare enter. They begged the patrol to hurry. My father, who was driving, sped up to reach the location as quickly as possible. He said that when they turned onto the street, a group of neighbors waved to them to come closer. They were the ones who had reported the incident. Most of them were still in their pajamas since it was very late, though my father doesn't remember the exact time. He and his partner got out of the patrol car, but before the neighbors could say anything, a scream, a woman's scream, came from the house. My father said it was so piercing it chilled him to the bone. The house itself looked clearly abandoned from the outside. They instructed the people gathered on the street to return to their homes because it was too dangerous to stay outside, especially if they needed to use their weapons. The neighbors reluctantly obeyed, though many kept peeking out through their windows. My father and his partner knocked on the door of the house, which was in very poor condition. They shouted, demanding that anyone inside surrender, warning they would enter by force and urging whoever was inside to come out with their hands raised. But they received no response. Instead, they were greeted by another chilling scream, a horrifying sound that my father said penetrated his very bones. Listening to it, he said, was like hearing someone suffer unbearable pain, as if something truly terrible was being done to a woman inside. My father's partner kicked the door and it fell to the floor. It only took one kick to break it because the door was so old. Both of them entered with flashlights and weapons in hand, illuminating every corner of the house. They didn't see anything on the ground floor except piles of garbage, a foul odor, cobwebs everywhere, and a few pieces of old furniture. The first floor was empty, no people, not even animals. But then, they heard noises coming from the upper floor. My father described it as something dragging itself across the floor. That's how he could explain it. Although the screams had stopped, They went upstairs cautiously, following standard procedures for such situations. When they reached the upper floor, they began illuminating every corner with their flashlights. To their surprise, there was absolutely no one there. My father said there was nowhere to hide, no windows to escape through, and no sign of anyone fleeing when they entered and heard the last scream. They couldn't find anything. However, in one part of the second floor, my father said it looked like the main bedroom of the house. There, they found a circle on the floor with a giant pentagram and many things written on the walls in another language. He said those markings were written in feces. They cordoned off the area to ensure no one could enter. Although they didn't find anyone in the house, it was clearly unsafe for obvious reasons. They interviewed some of the neighbors to get context. The neighbors said the horrible screams started around 1 a.m. At first, they couldn't figure out where they were coming from. But when they opened their windows, or in some cases stepped outside to investigate, they realized the sounds were coming from the abandoned house. Initially, everyone was terrified and confused because the house had been uninhabited for years. But on certain nights, several neighbors had seen people entering the house through one of the front windows late at night. The neighbors chose to stay indoors and not investigate further, afraid these individuals might harm them. They didn't look trustworthy, and nothing good could come from people sneaking into an abandoned house in the middle of the night. That was the general testimony from the neighbors who called the police. But no one ever figured out where those horrifying screams and cries came from. My father theorized that it could have been a demon because it was obvious satanic rituals had been performed there. This conclusion was based on what they found upstairs and the neighbors' testimonies, which included accounts of men entering the house in the early hours just days before. For him, it was clear, but of course they couldn't put that in the official report. So the case remained unresolved. The house was demolished sometime later, as it had no owner. We don't know if it's still just an empty lot because we no longer live in that area. This story was always told to me by my uncle, who was a local police officer his entire life. He's retired now but has many anecdotes and experiences, both good and bad, from his career. I have many to share, but this time, I want to tell you one of the strangest and saddest things that ever happened to him. He said that one night, he was at the police station when they received a call from a little girl asking for help for her brother. She had a sweet, childlike voice, no older than 6 years old. That's what they described when they received the alert. My uncle and his partner headed to the address the girl had given, though they didn't know what was happening. The girl didn't say much, only that her little brother needed help, her parents were bad, and they should hurry. They arrived at the house, which my uncle noted was very neglected. There was a lot of trash in the yard, and the grass was overgrown. They knocked on the door and a man opened it, but only a few inches, just enough to see part of his face but nothing inside the house. My uncle explained that they'd received an emergency call from that address, saying a little girl had asked for help for her brother. He politely asked the man to let them in to make sure everything was okay. The man became visibly upset and refused to let them in, curtly saying, "There's no little girl living here." My uncle and his partner insisted, saying they would get a warrant if necessary and that things would escalate. Finally, they convinced the man to let them in. In the living room, they found a woman sitting on the couch watching TV. When questioned, she and the man claimed they had only one child, as their daughter had passed away several months ago. My uncle asked to verify this by inspecting the 2 bedrooms. In one of the rooms, they found the boy lying on his bed, with visible bruises on his face and arms. It was clear the child needed help, as his parents had been abusing him. It was also evident they didn't love him. After rescuing the boy and following all the required protocols, it was confirmed that the parents were telling the truth. The girl, the boy's older sister, had died 2 months earlier from an untreated illness. The girl who had already passed away had called the police to save her brother. My uncle couldn't find any other explanation. The call was recorded in the emergency call logs. My uncle verified it himself, confirming that a little girl had indeed called, asking for help for her brother. Of course, this recording is kept confidential by the police and has never been released. It's something they could never explain except as paranormal. I work as a highway patrol officer, patrolling different roads in my state at night. I should mention I live in the United States. I was born here, but my entire family is Mexican, so I consider myself one too. My job involves ensuring drivers obey speed limits, wear seatbelts, and have legal plates, among other things. All these rules are strictly enforced, with hefty fines for violations. One night, I was driving my patrol car on a relatively busy highway. I was doing my usual checks when I noticed a small hand waving at me from the trunk of an SUV ahead of me. It was a closed trunk, which is illegal for minors because of the danger involved. Everyone must be seated and buckled up. I decided to investigate further, so I got closer. In the darkness, I could make out the silhouette of a small child waving at me. I waved back but knew I had to do my job because it was unsafe for the child to be in the trunk. I turned on my patrol lights, signaling the SUV to pull over. Once they stopped, I parked behind them, got out of my car, and approached the vehicle. Inside were an American couple in their 40s, a man and a woman. I explained the reason for stopping them, saying it was illegal to have their child in the trunk. They looked shocked. I glanced at the trunk but could no longer see the child. Then they told me, "There's no one else with us." I politely asked them to exit the vehicle so I could inspect it. I was sure of what I had seen. However, there was no child in the trunk or anywhere in the SUV. It was just the two of them. I apologized, insisting I was certain I had seen a child waving at me from the trunk. The woman then said, "Maybe it was Josh. This SUV belonged to my sister, and her son died years ago in it. He had heart problems and didn't make it to the hospital in time." Her husband laughed sarcastically, clearly skeptical, and apologized for what she had said. He asked if they could leave, to which I agreed, also apologizing for the misunderstanding. The next day, while reviewing my patrol car's dashcam footage, I saw the shadow of the child waving at me from the trunk, confirming that what I saw was real and not my imagination. There was indeed the shadow of a child waving goodbye from the trunk of that SUV. Even though I thoroughly searched the vehicle, even lifting the seats, there was no one there. To this day, this incident keeps me thinking for hours. I had never seen anything like it, never a ghost. The fact that it happened while I was working made it even more dramatic.